We good? The thumbs up. Okay, I'm waiting for the thumbs up. Thumbs up. Welcome to the first lecture today, which is Tuesday, the 29th of August, 2025. July, August, whatever. It's July. I'm Roslyn Taylor. Hello, lovely people online. Hello, lovely people in the room. I'm going to start off with an unauthorized announcement, which is about Gathering Leaves, which is the retreat for Swedenborgian and New Church women around the world. It's happening in September 25 to 28 at the Temenos Retreat Center in Pennsylvania. If you're female, identify as female, I encourage you to register. Registration ends at the end of August, and this time I think I do have the correct month. And it would be great to have you there sharing in that. Okay. And then I do have a disclaimer before I start my lecture. My lecture is titled, The Divine is Leading, a Promise to Deborah. The theme for this week is the covenants between the divine and the children of Israel. And yesterday, God laid out for us very beautifully what those covenants were. If you were paying attention. Oh, and then Sage talked to us about the covenants with Abraham and Sarah. And I got to say, Sage, I thank you for including Sarah in that, because those generations of generations wouldn't have happened without all the women. So thank you. And anyway, so if you paid attention, after the Abrahamic covenant would be the Moses covenant, the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. If you were hoping to hear something about that, I apologize. I've skipped many years ahead in what I'm going to present. But what I'm presenting is a covenant, but maybe not the one you would expect in the sequence. But the other part of that story is that Susanna had sent out an email to the various people that would be presenting this week, about these are the covenants and blah, blah, blah. And I wrote back and said, well, I noticed that those are all men that were giving the covenants. There's no woman in the story. You can tell that I have a bit of a mission in life or something like that. And Susanna, like, yeah, go for it. So I'm going to be talking about a covenant that was given to a woman, Deborah, the prophet. So I'm going to start by reading Judges, parts of Judges 4 and Judges 5, which are the two chapters in the Bible about Deborah. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the New English Bible translation. So it may not be completely familiar, but it's still the same story. The Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight after Ehud's death. The Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Canaan, who ruled in Hazor. The general of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. The Israelites cried out for help to the Lord, because Sisera had 900 chariots with iron-rimmed wheels, and he cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She would sit under the date palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the Ephraimite hill country. The Israelites would come up to her to have their disputes settled. She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali. She said to him, "Is it not true that the Lord God of Israel is commanding you? Go. March to Mount Tabor. Take with you 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun. I will bring Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to you at the Kishon River, along with his chariots and huge army. I will hand him over to you." And then I'm skipping over the bit where Deborah and Barak, who was her general, and 10,000 soldiers went up to Mount Tabor. Deborah said to Barak, "Spring into action, for this is the day the Lord is handing Sisera over to you. Has the Lord not taken the lead?" So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The Lord routed Sisera, all his chariotry, and all his army with the edge of the sword. And then jumping to the very end of that song that I read earlier, and the land had rest for 40 years. So that's the story from which I'm extracting the covenant of. Has the Lord not taken the lead? But I will give you another disclaimer, and that is that stories about battles and people being slaughtered and the edge of the sword and murder and rape and violence are not my favorite stories in the Word. And all of those are elements in this story in Judges 4 and 5, and I spared you some of it. But of course I understand from a Swedenborgian perspective that those are necessary parts of telling the deeper story of our spiritual journeys and of the spiritual struggles that are part of that. But I still don't relish reading them and hearing them and actually lecturing about them. But here I am, that's what I picked. So I'm just setting aside my distaste of that part in order to lift up a covenant, the promise that the divine is leading. So I'm just going to dive a little bit into the history behind the story. So this story with Deborah took place about 1100 BCE. As I mentioned, it's in Judges 4 and 5, and it's one of the many stories where the leader of Israel, at this point it was Deborah, are called on to engage in warfare. Now, a lot of people, when I start talking about Deborah, and some of you know my online ministry is Deborah's Tree. She's a prophetess that I've used sort of as a logo or a symbol for my work in lifting up the voices of Swedenborgian women. So people often ask me, who's Deborah? I've never heard of her. And so her story is often ignored. I know in Sunday school growing up, we heard part of the story, the gruesomest part of the story in Sunday school, but it was never tied to, and Deborah was a female prophet at the time. Like I didn't know until adulthood either. And there's probably a couple of reasons why Deborah has been ignored. It's only 2 small chapters of Judges of the whole of the Hebrew Scriptures, but also with her being a woman, that might be one reason why she's ignored. And if you're the early leaders of the Christian church and to this day, and you don't believe that women can have leadership roles, you might want to kind of suppress this information that actually the divine has called on women in the past to lead the church. So her story is ignored often, even though she was very successful, led this battle and defeated the enemy for 40 years of peace. So she is actually one of 5 prophetesses in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the Gospels. And those are Miriam, Moses' sister, Huldan, who was the prophet during one of the later kings that the king consulted, Isaiah's wife, who's not given a name, and we don't know exactly what she prophesied about, but she's identified as a prophetess, and Anna, who had been waiting in the temple and recognized Jesus when he was brought to be dedicated. There are other women like Sarah and Mary who say some prophetic words in specific contexts, but there are 5 who are actually identified as prophetesses. And the other prophetesses delivered messages of gratitude and celebration. Huldan talked about imminent judgment. They promised restoration and hope, both before and after Deborah, but she was the only prophetess who was called to lead in war. Which brings me to maybe unpack a little bit about the warfare theme in the Word, which, as I told you, I don't particularly like, but it's there for a reason. Say again?
It's what it is.
It is what it is, exactly.
Human nature.
So the first call to warfare in the Hebrew Scriptures is back at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 14, and this occurred about 2000 BCE when Abram was told to send 318 soldiers to successfully free his nephew Lot. Lot had been captured by 9 Canaanite warlords, and so that was the first documented in the Bible war or battle. And in the Hebrew Scriptures, the last call to war is in Nehemiah 7. That's in about 450 BCE, when they were rebuilding after the exile in Babylon. And I don't know who sent, I guess Nehemiah sent armed guards stationed around Jerusalem to protect it from the Ammonites and other people who were attacking them because they'd come back into the land. So that span of time is about 1,500 years, and it's a recurring theme in the Hebrew scriptures about fighting battles and being prepared to fight. But that warfare image continues all the way to the end of the Christian scriptures, with, in the book of Revelation, the prophecy of the final battle, the battle of Armageddon between the forces of good and evil. And Swedenborg says that battle for the Last Judgment was fulfilled in 1757, so that covers more or less the same kind of time span, 1,700 years, 1,500 years in the Hebrew scriptures. But in all of these themes, in all of these battles, of course, goodness wins out. The divine is leading all the time in these battles, which is true of the deeper meaning for us of our spiritual battles. So, going back specifically to the story of Deborah and her general Barak, it's one of many, many stories where confidence is expressed in divine leadership and the promise of success in battle. And so in this story, Deborah's story, has the Lord not taken the lead? So actually, this promise of divine leadership in battle was pretty standard pre-battle procedure in biblical times. John Wood wrote in his book, Perspectives on War in the Bible, that he identified 5 pre-war rituals or practices that were common in those many, many battles and wars that the Israelites fought as they took over the land of Canaan and then defended themselves from the people who wanted their lands back. And I might make a little comment, I think we still see that going on in the Middle East. That's what happens when you colonize or take over land. Okay, I won't go there, we'll just back off. All right, so the 5 pre-war rituals. Number 1, a trumpet or a ram's horn sounds to say the battle's on. But meanwhile, in camp, everybody kept ritual purity when in camp. What happens in the battle stays in the battle. You get blood all over you, you become defiled, but that's all right. You come back and observe ritual purity in camp. The 3rd pre-war ritual is Jehovah is consulted or an animal sacrifice is offered. The 4th one is the leader assembles the troops and assures them that the divine is with them and is fighting for them. And then the 5th ritual or practice was that the leader would encourage the troop to be brave and courageous as they face their enemy. So in Deborah's story, we only hear about pre-war rituals number 3 and 4, consultation with Jehovah and the assurance of divine leadership and protection. In the story as it's written, it doesn't say that Deborah consulted Jehovah. She just got messages from the divine about the timing of all of this activity. So she did, I guess, get the prophecy that it's now the time to finally put an end to King Jabin and Sisera's oppression for 20 years of the Israelites. Now's the time. So when the troops were assembled, waiting in Mount Tabor for the right time to attack, the divine again appointed the time for the battle to begin. So she commanded Barak, her general, spring into action when she knew it was the right time, that the divine was going to lead them to victory. I will say part of the backstory of that is initially when she summoned Barak and said, don't you know that the divine is commanding all this? We need to go to Mount Tabor with all the men. And he said, if you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not go. He knew that he needed her presence and the divine presence through her for success in the battle. He didn't want that responsibility of leading it by himself and deciding when the right time was and everything. He wanted to hear Deborah saying, spring into action. Has the Lord not taken the lead? He needed that. And so he was willing to fight, but he needed the assurance that the divine was leading. And as I'm saying these things, I'm also thinking in my mind what that's like for us as we approach our battles. You know, if you're with me, I'll do it, but don't ask me to do this on my own, that kind of thing. So, little segue that was, I guess, into the deeper meaning of our spiritual struggles. The personal message in this story, which I think is the most important level of all of the Bible stories. And in this promise of being led by the divine. So first of all, I turn to Swedenborg. And there's not a lot about this story in Swedenborg's writings, but this is what I found. First of all, that the story of Deborah and Barak is about the battles of spiritual struggle, which would not really surprise you, really. But this, anyway, whatever. Also, the perversion of truth and its renewal, and the revival of spiritual religion. And as we saw yesterday, spiritual religion was with the ancient church and the Christian church, and it's when religion is based on love of other people, love of the neighbor, love of community, rather than directly love of the divine. I will say, in reading this story, I don't really see the perversion of truth and its renewal. I see the renewal part. I don't see the perversion of truth particularly, or maybe that the religion was very natural and was trying to become spiritual. But that's what Swedenborg wrote. I'll just say that. Deliverance from King Jabin's lengthy oppression means deliverance from being blocked from receiving inflow out of heaven. Now that's the part that I can relate to. Deliverance from being blocked from receiving inflow out of heaven. For 20 years they'd been trying to be rid of this, and they were blocked. So taken together, sort of the takeaway message that I get from Swedenborgian theology is that this story is more deeply about feeling blocked from heavenly influence. Deborah and Barak, their battle was focusing on overcoming being blocked from heavenly influence. So how could we be blocked from heavenly influence? Anybody? I was thinking it's like maybe by clinging to false concepts that are not helping in clearly seeing the divine and feeling heavenly influence. Anybody think of a false concept that might be blocking you or anybody from that flow of heavenly influence? Negative thoughts?
One might say no.
We
might say no to a feeling that
yeah. I'm repeating the statements because we haven't passed the mic, but that was saying no when we're given a feeling and saying, no, I don't want that feeling. When really it's a feeling that the divine is giving us. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Or just being very confident in our ideas.
Being very confident in our ideas and not being open. Right. A couple that I thought of were the false idea, whatever, that people love me only when I'm doing things. Or the divine is angry and is out to get me, or punish me, whatever. And so if you're sort of clinging on to any of those concepts or thoughts or ways of being, you are probably blocking some of the heavenly influence. You can't keep the divine out completely, but you're blocking what you might be able to get. So the story is also about struggling to get clarity and heavenly influence back. And when that's accomplished through probably a lot of work, then feeling spiritually revived and renewed when that false thinking is replaced by thoughts that are closer to the truth, like not being as negative, having a more optimistic outlook. Or, yeah, this feeling's been given to me. I'm welcoming that into my life. I'm forgetting what Sage said. Oh, confidence in your own thoughts. That might be replaced with, yeah, I've got some pretty good thinking, but I'm going to surrender my thinking to what the divine's going to lead me to. Or maybe people love me because I'm a child of God. Or the divine is not angry with me or anybody else and is certainly not out to punish. The more you can hold on to those thoughts, the less blocked you might be from heavenly influence. So the Divine One's promise in this process is that they're taking the lead in this process. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to figure out how to fight it, what weapons to use, whatever. You don't have to do all that on your own. has not the divine taken the lead? And so that's sort of the deeper meaning about struggling. But another part of the story that spoke to me was this whole thing about wake up, because it's quite strong. Wake up, wake up, wake up, Deborah, wake up. So that's reported more in the song of victory rather than in the narrative of how it happened. But it sort of struck me. So to me, I think this deeper part of the story is that we need to wake up and sing a song of praise to get this process going, which when you're feeling blocked from divine influence, you might not necessarily think about singing a song of praise, but that's what's here in the text. When we're spiritually asleep, we may not even know that we're being blocked by our fallacious, self-serving ideas, and we may not know that praising God's going to help. But at some point, we will be nudged or called or hit over the head by a 2x4, whatever they say in the 12-step program. We will be called to wake up and to develop enough self-awareness to realize that we're actually feeling spiritually blocked. And that's when we'll be called to practice enough honest and sometimes painful self-examination to identify what are the inner thoughts and feelings that are blocking us, that are getting in the way of becoming the person that we want to be. So, you go through this wake-up process, you realize what's going on. It's not necessarily fun. In fact, I'm going to say it's not fun at all. And after that comes the struggle with those false ideas and behaviors that are getting in the way of inflow from heaven. And in my experience, it's like a lifetime. Not like one struggle and 40 years of rest. No. The divine is fighting with us and for us. That's what we hear in Swedenborg. And we have to bring our consciousness to the spiritual struggle as well. To Sage's point, like we can't let go of our own thinking. We have to bring our own consciousness and our own willingness in our own thinking, but submitting to the leadership of the divine. But in that process, we can easily feel abandoned and spiritually weak as we go through the struggle. We might really want to have Deborah with us. We might really want to have that presence. And at that point, it helps to remember that in the past, maybe we've been confident that the divine will lead us through whatever we have to go through to get to spiritual renewal. Or maybe if we can't remember how we've experienced that in the past, we can remember that we can ask for the willingness to have that confidence. That's the first step. And as hard as it may be, it also helps to thank and praise the divine for waking us up and preparing us for the change that needs to happen. Yeah, it's sort of counterintuitive, but if that's something else to remember, like, thank you for waking me up. I'm not really happy with what I'm seeing, but thank you. So maybe going a little deeper into the deeper personal spiritual meaning, how does this story feel in you? I kind of outline my understanding of what the inner process is that's described in this biblical story of Deborah and Barak. And especially Deborah communicating to Barak that the promise that the divine is leading in the battle against spiritual oppression. And understanding the process is important, but I think more importantly, how does it feel in your life to be going through that? So one way to get in touch with how it feels is through body prayer. There's definitely some spiritual practices that use a lot of body prayer. And that body prayer is using intentional movement as a way to connect your body, mind, and spirit so that you can really know how it feels. So I'm hearing laughter, but I'm proposing, if you're willing, you could join me in some physical movements that would embody this part of the story of Deborah, that would embody for you this part of the process of spiritual renewal. So the first step for this would be, I invite you to call to mind something that you would like to see changed in your life. You don't have to tell anybody what it is, just think about something you'd like to see changed in your life. It might be a behavior pattern that you're ashamed of, or a thought process that won't go away, or some kind of attitude that cripples you, or anything that you've been stalling about, like being a better friend or whatever it is. So I'll give you a moment to sort of settle into what it is that you'd like to see changed in your life. And while you hold that, I'm going to lead you through a body prayer, and I'm going to be doing the motions, and you can copy me if you want, or you can do whatever you're led to do, whatever your mind, body, spirit wants to do. And as we go through it, notice how you feel as you move through the body prayer. So the first part is about wake up. So I'm going to start in a sleeping position. And wake up. Now, sing a song of praise. Raise your head. Praise. Lift up a song to the divine. Notice how that feels. Summon Barak. I like that. Come over here, man. And prepare for war. Pick up your weapon, whatever your weapon is. And then this part of the story, Barak says, I will not go alone. I will not go alone. I'm afraid. I'm not going to go alone. But then she tells him, spring into action. Spring into action. And then she asks that question, has not the divine taken the lead? Hasn't the divine taken the lead? Then they go out and they defeat the army with the edge of the sword. Whatever that kind of battle looks like. The part I don't want to see. And now we get rest for 40 years. All right, well, I'm going to go through that again. Feel free to stand up if it makes it easier for you to do this. So we're going to start off in a sleeping position. Wake up. Sing a song of praise. Summon Barak. Prepare for war. I will not go alone. But spring into action. And then, has not the divine taken the lead? Now go forth and defeat that army with the edge of the sword. And then rest for 40 years. All right. You may be seated, or if your body's telling you to stand, then stand. Okay. So, coming back into this space, any kind of responses to the body prayer, any shifts in feelings or feelings of uncomfortable being asked to do something you didn't want to do, or anything? Yes, Sage.
I had tears coming.
Oh, wow.
It's funny, my kids act out Bible stories sometimes. Sort of like that, we were acting it out.
Yes. But when you do it prayerfully, yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, use the mic. Like my mic? Okay. That one. Sage had said that it brought tears, and her children have acted out Bible stories, but it felt qualitatively different. Maybe I'm reading that in.
Well, just I'm realizing, I wonder what that's like for them. Like that is a powerful way to engage with the word, to act it out.
I just wanted to say that I don't want to go alone.
Well, thank you for that. So, in conclusion, I always like it when the speaker gives you the heads up, like this is going to be ending soon. So, in conclusion, has the divine not taken the lead? It's the promise that the divine is always leading us, but it is a struggle. So, like Deborah's General Barak, we might feel blocked, we might be hesitant, we might feel unsure of our mental and spiritual readiness for this battle. We might want to be assured of divine presence and strength, like Barak did. But also, like Barak, we need to listen for the divine voice saying, "Wake up, I'm leading you. Now is the time, spring into action, do this thing." And when the time is right, the divine promises to lead us into new personal and spiritual territory. Scary as that might be, and futile as it may seem after what feels like 20 years of struggle, like this is going to be the time when I can finally maybe set this part of myself aside that I'm not happy with. But the promise is there. Wake up, spring into action, the divine is leading. So, now time for grilling the speaker. Or commenting or anything.
Thank you, Roz. I really appreciate you lifting up Deborah, and just a sort of reflection on women in the Bible. I like, she's and I guess in connection to what's come up around the kings, that God didn't really want to have kings, but we wanted them. And I think it's interesting that when the women are in authority, they are in the judges, which was the more divinely led way of negotiating community, that you would have shared leadership that would rotate and change, which is much more of a feminine model, perhaps, that women show up as judges, that they show up as prophets, the ones kind of speaking out, but they don't often show up as those kings, those leaders with that authority, and maybe there's some wisdom in that. And then I guess on the I was just thinking about there was 20 years of suffering, but then 40 years of rest. There's something interesting in that payoff. You get into the battle, and but if you're willing to go there, there's the doubling, I guess, of the reward just occurred to me.
Also, as far as those the numbers, the 20 and 40, it sort of struck me as, I would have thought it would be 40 years of struggle, 40 years right. 40 signifying temptation. And I'm not sure what 20 is like. It's like half temptation maybe, or light. I don't know. But like, it's 20 years of struggle and 40 years of rest. And
pretty good odds.
Yeah.
So, Guard Perry here. Thank you so much, Roz. I so thoroughly enjoyed your talk, and you gave us a lot of information about this story, and for the reasons you've lifted up, I celebrate as well. So I have one quick question, and then an observation. It's just a comment I would like to share. So the quick question is, I don't know that I know enough about the enemy that was attacking them. Could you say just a few words? I might have missed the name of this tribe or the reason they were fighting. I'm asking it just as a quick clarification, not as a deep question.
The text said that the Lord turned the people over to King Jabin of Canaan, who ruled in Hazor. So he's just another one of the many Canaanite warlords or kings in the area. But he was particularly well prepared with iron-rimmed wheels and 900 chariots. So that's why it went on for so long.
Okay, so thank you. And you named the year. This is all very early in the period of the judges,
Yes.
as we know, is when these were warlords and local leaders within the tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel. and judges were raised up to handle these problems.
Right.
So thank you. Well, listen, just to celebrate what you've done, this is a wonderful talk. It really was. You've did so many good things with that, and bringing in the reality of history is the violence that did actually happen and is actually still happening. So there's something very deep in human nature. So to be a realist is simply to say that is what's going on and has gone on and did go on. And the other piece of that is to be hopeful, to say, well, many of us are beyond that, and we're trying to teach something. Ourselves are beyond that, and we want to model something other than what's going on. So there's a hopeful piece of this and a responsible piece. I am wishing to lift up the important thing I believe that you did in my hearing. You brought this story historically, literally, biblically, and then you turned it into the teachings of the Swedenborgian movement, as there's an inner meaning of that, with no dismissing of the history, which is violent, or the literal story of the biblical Hebrew text, which is there. And Swedenborg was able to say, all of that is so. We're not spiritualizing it away, but within the human condition, there is another level that you were very skillful in bringing forward. The reason I'm speaking is now to observe, which I will reframe in a slight way, is you said and do say, so I'm celebrating what you said, this is not a critique, is we now have an understanding, and one can point to one head, so important. I'm here listening. It's true. It's not a small thing. Then to shift, which you did, which was so very helpful, the feeling level. Now the slight reframe is, I would say, one is not, they are both so important that one can say one is more important than the other. So maybe some people say, well, I think understanding is more important. And other people say, no, I think feeling is more important. Well, I would like to offer and observe, they're both important. And Swedenborg is crystal clear. Feeling without understanding is something he said, well, it just isn't in his way. Sometimes it is. So I'm not making categorical claims about what people can experience or not or think. Or I'm saying in a sort of a objective way that understanding our feeling and feeling our understanding are two sides of one coin. And when I felt that in your talk, I was very happy and very gratified. And I'm simply lifting it up in that way, if I may. I'm lifting it up in that way, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that, the balance of will and understanding. You know, because it occurs to me, if I just started off with, okay, we're going to do this exercise, wake up, divine your light, and you would have had some experience, but knowing the story, having gone through the story, I think, like you said, it's feeling your understanding and understanding your feeling. Yeah. Yes, Julie?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this as someone who is aging apparently quite rapidly, that there's a struggle there. It's the same kind of struggle of why am I losing this, why am I losing that, and then trying to accept the fact that we all have to exit to the other side, but it's a struggle, just like the wars.
Thank you for lifting that up. Some spiritual struggles are very grounded in our physical experience. Yeah, spiritual, yeah.
This is Susanna, and I want to lift up the word know. Do you not know that the Lord is leading? And I think that's the deeper knowing, not just the acknowledgement of it, but the feeling that you believe that the Lord is leading. And I think when you did that hand motion for Barack saying, I won't go alone,
Yeah.
He didn't know. He didn't have that sense of knowing. And it's wonderful when you do, but God still loves you when you don't. And I feel like very Barack right now. Just,
No.
I want, if you go, I'll go. Yeah, that's kind of the feeling.
Trevor?
Please call out who's next.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for doing this, David.
Yes. Thank you,
It
David.
makes it easier if I...
So you know where you're going? Yes. Trevor?
This is Trevor. I'd like to thank you for bringing to our attention two things. One is the very early biblical call to female spiritual leadership. Our denomination did this, I don't know, 50 years ago or so, and 2 generations have grown up with it being normal. It's normal now, and nobody even thinks about it and questions it anymore, and we finally are, it's normal to listen to the female aspect of wisdom. And I appreciate your bringing the biblical concept that it's right there. They did it, what, millennia ago? And so this is not anything new in history. The other one is body prayer. Never heard of it. So it's delightful because in my life, every single time in my childhood that I acted out a Bible story, I remember it, and it's real for me. And so it occurred that acting out a Bible story is body prayer. Doing the motions while you're talking about it. So thank you for those.
I first came across body prayer in Neil Douglas Klotz's book about prayers of the cosmos. This is back in the 1990s. And so he goes through the Lord's Prayer and expounds each of the things. But he done a lot of Middle Eastern study because he was bringing it from the Aramaic text, and this is an Aramaic sort of Middle Eastern tradition. And so for each of the phrases in the Lord's Prayer, he had body prayers. Very powerful, if you want to look at that. Prayers of the cosmos. So seeing no other hands, I think, oh, it's Dean.
All
Ooh.
I just want to give a shout out for, we'll sit out here in the front at 8:30 each morning that we're having lectures, and come and sing. Come and sing with the Lord for a bit, and then you'll feel yourself coming here, and it's like a body thing. Because we were singing this morning, and I couldn't do the hand motions, and then finally it all came together. It's a beautiful feeling, man.
All right, well, thank you very much. The next, oops, thank you very much, all of you. The next lecture's at 10. Yeah, 10 o'clock. Don't know the month, don't know.